Coming up on CarAdvice, they revolutionise the way we consume music, entertainment and media. But will auto subscriptions ever take off in Australia?
Bonjour, monsieur. Which manufacturers were fantastique? Who aimed for the future? And which ones flopped at one of the world's busiest automotive shows, the 2018 Paris Motor Show?
Dual cab utes and four-wheel drive station wagons. Why four-wheel drive wagons are actually the smarter buy.
Hi, I'm Trent, Nikolic. Welcome to CarAdvice. Thank you for joining us again. We've got a big show this evening, including car subscription services. Will they ever take off in Australia? The highs and lows of the 2018 Paris Motor Show, and dual cab utes versus four-wheel drive wagons. Why we at CarAdvice think four-wheel drive wagons are a smarter way to spend your money. With me at the desk, Paul Maric, a senior road tester at CarAdvice. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, mate.
And first up, we're going to talk about the Mercedes-Benz GLE. This is a large SUV, and it's moving ahead for 2019. A few changes for it.
Look, it looks fantastic. And
yeah, I think it does.
Mercedes-Benz has absolutely nailed the design, and it's good news for the future AMG models, because if the base one looks as good as this, imagine what it's going to look like with a fire-breathing V8 under the bonnet. So key information here, it's coming to Australia in 2019. It will debut with a third row as well, which is also excellent news for families in Oz, and it also means that we're going to get a car that comes with a mild hybrid system. So that means under the bonnet is an inline-6 turbocharged petrol engine, and it's mated to a 48-volt mild hybrid system. Now, the difference there between a 12-volt and a 48-volt is more current, and it means more technical complexity.
I was going to say it's 36 volts is the difference. Well, it's from 12 to 48. What does it do specifically, though? Because we saw Audi debut with this about 2 years ago in the Q7. And I think what it's about, you know, if you speak to the engineers, it's about taking some of the load off the internal combustion engine and providing an electrical system that can drive a whole bunch of other things in the vehicle, yeah?
Absolutely. And we're talking about things like an intuitive stop-start system. So stop-start systems take the edge off the fuel that's used when the car's stationary. But a mild hybrid system takes that one step further by taking away the huge amount of energy needed to get a 2-tonne beast like this off the line. Yeah. So it is good news for buyers. We're talking about diesel and petrol engines that will be coming to Australia. Now, Mercedes-Benz claims, in addition to 80mm extra wheelbase, that you can fit an adult that measures in at 1.8 metres in the third row.
So that's a 6-foot-tall adult. Yeah. In our experience at CarAdvice, these third rows really aren't that comfortable for adults. Outside of the Land Rover Discovery, there really isn't a third row that's actually usable for adults. Yep. So we'll wait till we have a look at that. MBUX, this has got the Mercedes-Benz user experience, which BMW have now debuted in some of their cars as well. And this is the system like when you say, hey Siri or hey Google, you can say, hey Mercedes-Benz, take me to the nearest pizza shop, which you feel a bit like an idiot doing, let's be honest.
That's true, and it debuted originally in the A-Class, and here in the GLE it takes it that one step further with bigger screens, more intuitive functions. I mean, it really is a good system. Now, one thing I love here, and that you're going to love, because I have been on some four-wheel drive tests with you where you've been stuck. Yeah. Actually, quite a lot.
Quite a few, yeah.
But what they've engineered into this system as part of that 48-volt electrical setup is suspension on each corner that can be varied almost instantly. So if you are stuck in sand, press a button and the car starts jumping up and down like a gangster's car.
Yeah, exactly.
And then it gets like you out of the hole.
On four-wheel driving, if you're not stuck, you're not trying hard enough. Just remember that. I was with BMW at the recent Paris Motor Show, and they revealed the all-new 3 Series. Now, while X models have taken over from passenger car sales in Australia, globally, the 3 Series is still the most significant vehicle for BMW. Yeah. Globally, they sell more 3 Series than any other car. So it's a really, really heavily focused vehicle for the brand. 41mm longer wheelbase, and it's bigger everywhere, so longer, wider, taller, but it doesn't actually look that much bigger. And I don't know about you, but BMW told us when they released it that they wanted it to look different to the 5 Series. It looks still to me a bit like a scaled-down 5 Series, does it not?
Look, it's not such a bad thing.
It looks good, yeah.
I mean, for viewers at home, wheelbase is the length between the wheels, so it means that you're getting a little bit more legroom in there. Yep. And that was always needed, because backseat of a 3 Series...
Yeah, it started
wish
to get
that
a bit,
upon anyone.
It started to get a bit uncomfortable.
Look, it is a good-looking car, and I think they've nailed that design. Up the front there, you'll notice this isn't just an error in the image, but it has the slatted grille at the front that's closed. Yeah. So that's variable. So it opens and closes.
Grill, yeah.
Yeah, opens and closes as the car needs more air to circulate through the engine. It's coming with a raft of really good engines, and I cannot wait for the M models as well.
Well, there's an M Performance model coming. They're starting off with two, diesel and a petrol engine first up. M Performance model coming later. The big news for me, though, with this car, Paul, is the focus on tech. So we talked about the Mercedes-Benz user experience. BMW have got a similar one. What you can do with BMW, though, is you don't have to say, hey, BMW. You can go into the menu system and change it. So I can say, hey, Paul, I can change mine to say, hey, Paul, tell me how to get lost, for example, which you would do anyway. But you've got a 12.3-inch screen for the driver, 10.2-inch screen centrally, and a much bigger focus on infotainment. So this carries forward that whole thing that all manufacturers are doing, where they're not just building cars that drive to a certain standard, they also perform to a certain standard in terms of electronics, because that's where they're going. Paul, tell me about the Audi e-tron, because we've heard the use of e-tron with Audi products before. Yep. Tell me a little bit about what this vehicle is, what makes it tick.
OK, first up, it is stunning. It just looks incredible. It does look person really as well. Yeah. It looks amazing. And they've effectively taken the concept car and built a production car off it. Like this is not too far away from what the concept car looked like. You'll notice there on the wing mirrors, it doesn't actually have traditional mirrors, so it uses screens that sit within the door. It really is a work of art. It is a fully electric SUV, so it will be coming to Australia in 2019. Pricing is still to be determined. But we're talking about a car with 300 kilowatts of power, 660 newton metres of torque.
Now, I was going to say, we know that electric cars are fast. Yes. We know that they can get off the mark quickly and get moving. The biggest thing that viewers will have heard us talk about, and they've probably heard people talk about, is range anxiety, right? Yep. Which means you can't get far enough in your electric vehicle. For the moment, charging them still takes a little bit of time. You know, in the best sense at home, probably 4 to 5 hours to go from, 30% up to 100%. What range is Audi saying you can get with this? Because I think that's key.
It is, and this is under a new test cycle that's much harder, and they're talking about over 400 kilometres of range, which is certainly a realistic amount of range for anybody. It uses a 95 kilowatt-hour battery and will launch in Europe with a starting price of €80,000. Yeah. So I suspect when it does land in Australia, we'll be looking at around the $150,000.
Yeah, not going to be cheap, but as you said, a beautiful-looking vehicle and really high-tech as well. There are contentious issues in cars, and one of the big issues that we've been reading a lot about are car subscription services. Let me first explain, Paul, what they are in a basic sense, because there'll be a lot of viewers that have got no idea what we're talking about. For most viewers, you buy a car, you keep the car for X amount of time and you sell it. It's all pretty simple. That's the way it's always worked. However, with car subscription services, there are a couple of different ways that you can do it. Some of you will have seen GoGet out there, and what that system is a range of cars out on the street. You have an app on your phone, you unlock the car in a certain way once you've subscribed to the service, and you pay per use. Pick the car up, drive it somewhere else, drop it off. Makes sense. There are other ways where you lease the vehicle from a manufacturer, but you're obviously paying more for the lease because it's a shorter lease. At the end of that lease term, you hand it back and the manufacturer decides what they're going to do with it. For me, I don't necessarily think that car subscriptions are going to work in Australia. We'll get to that in a minute. Paul, tell us a few of the manufacturers that are involved in it.
OK, so in Australia, we're talking about a very limited number because this is an expanding thing that's growing slowly. But currently in Australia, we have Holden doing a car subscription service through Maven, which is big in the US. And globally, we have brands like Mercedes-Benz and Volvo doing this quite extensively as well. So depending on where you are around the world, you will have different options available to you.
I've just spent time with BMW at Paris Motor Show, obviously, and they spoke about a fleet of i3s, which is their small electric hatch, that they're going to introduce into a car-sharing service. I think it was in Munich, but certainly somewhere in Germany. They're going to be running that system. We know of a company in northern Italy that has a raft of Renault Zoes, their little electric vehicle, and the way that works is you then subscribe. The Zoes are parked in certain areas. They'll be on charge. Go and pick your vehicle up, take it off charge, and you use it. I think with that one in Italy, you pay per hour or per distance, however you're using it for. One of the problems in Australia, I think, especially with electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles that are plug-in, is a lack of places to plug them in, basically, a lack of infrastructure. Do you see that as being a problem for us here?
Look, it is for electric cars, and this is where we need to have a chat about who steps in to fix this? I mean, is it the car manufacturer? Is it the subscription service? Is it the government? Just on that Paris example, we both had the chance to visit the motor show, and during the motor show we strolled around the streets and saw something very interesting, and that was charging stations everywhere.
They're everywhere.
So you had these little Renault Zoes parked on the road, and you can plug in virtually anywhere. And this is where that system works. Short distance travel, easy charging, it's fine. In Australia, where you can't park anywhere without getting a parking fine, let alone finding a place to charge these things. You'll have someone in an SUV parking in an electric car spot, no doubt. It is a little more complex, but where I think this system could certainly work is when it comes to subscriptions for fancier cars. So imagine if Mercedes-Benz had a subscription service in Australia, and for the moment I'm happy with a C-Class, but summer comes around, when I go down the coast, I might swap it for a month for a convertible. Now, this is appealing, but the problem is it's much more expensive, because instead of a 5-year lease or a 3-year lease, we're talking about a condensed period. While it does include all your servicing and running costs, it is much more expensive because you're only borrowing the car for a little bit. So I think it really depends in Australia how they take this opportunity.
A lot of them are smartphone-based, they're app-based, they're really clever the way they work in terms of accessing where the car is. But I want to paint a couple of pictures for you. One, for example, you've got a rank of electric cars that's a 3-kilometre walk from your house. You get up in the morning, it's pouring down with rain, you've got a work bag, a gym bag, and, say, a bag with a coat, or the ladies are carrying an extra dress because they've got to go out after work that evening, right? So you're juggling all those 3 things with an umbrella. You've got to trudge 3 kilometres to your house. Then you've got to do the same thing at the other end at work. You've got to park the vehicle 3 k's from your office and walk the other 3 k's. I don't think in Australia that's as practical. I think that's a bit of an issue. The reason I don't love these subscription services is because invariably the cars are parked 3 metres out from the gutter, halfway out of a space where they should be. They're generally filthy. You see the mobile cleaners going around and cleaning them up, and they're set up with vans and vacuum cleaners out on the street. It's a bit of a messy system. And I think the other area that Australians are going to struggle with is sharing their vehicles. I mean, everybody out there knows what it's like when you give someone your car and you get it back 2 or 3 days later and it's got chip packets and apple cores and rubbish in the boot. Imagine that's your daily existence. You've got to pick up and drop off cars that are always like that.
Look, I get it, but I have lived in apartments before where the cars have been located in the car park where it doesn't rain. And if it does rain, you can use an umbrella. That also works.
Is that what you do?
Okay. So, look, I think it could work in Australia, but it just needs the right pricing and we need a level of dedication to it, because we're wedded to the fact that you buy a car or you lease a car and at the end you swap it or you sell it. It's going to take a lot to get Australia on board with this thing. We've seen with modern technology that even with Uber, when it came to Australia, people were in fits over the taxi industry when it's a fact that the taxi industry didn't evolve and a player like Uber could come in and disrupt. Well, this could be happening as well with subscription services. And I know personally that I'd love to be able to change a car every 3 or 6 months if it meant that I could get a bit of variety and had the flexibility as well of doing what I needed and not having to pay for servicing and getting surprises all the time. So I would personally be willing to pay a bit extra, but whether Australia's public wants to do the same is still a question.
Well, it gets more people into new cars, I guess, so that's a message there. There'd be more new cars on the road and more people driving new cars, which is a good thing. But I think, too, it's, as you said, it has to be cost-effective, because the reality is that if I can go and buy a car and it's costing me $5,000 a year to own that vehicle, for example, and I'm just picking a figure out of the air, but if it costs $5,000 and then it's $4,500 for a subscription service, I'm going to look at the end of the year and go, you know what, I can afford that extra $500 so that I own my car. I think it has to be cost effective, so that'll be the big thing.
And we've done an analysis at CarAdvice.com. You can check that out. We took a Honda Accord Euro as just an example and looked at the price of that car compared to the subscription cost. And there is a very fine line there between when that's cost effective and when it's not. But you may have seen some Ubers driving around, a lot of Kia Sportages, Holden Trax, Holden Astra. These are cars that are on leasing services, and Holden offers that locally with Maven. So, look, let's keep an eye on it. I'm keen to see how it plays out and whether people do pick up on it in Australia. Let us know your thoughts.
Yeah, tell us what you think. Have a look at the numbers, have a look at the story at caradvice.com and tell us whether you would be happy driving a car that someone else owns. Paris Motor Show hits and misses. Now, do you know what I think of when I think of the Paris Motor Show?
Tell me, Trent.
Hit. Croissants.
I love
They're
croissants.
always really good, and I ate probably 35 a day. Miss, coffee.
Yes.
Just across the border from France, there's a place called Italy. And you know what they do? They make really good coffee. Yet in Paris, the coffee's rubbish. But we were there for the motor show. We weren't there for eating, even though we looked like we were there for the eating. Tell me your hit from the Paris Motor Show, because viewers that don't understand, Paris alternates with Frankfurt. So one year the motor show's in Frankfurt in Germany, next year it's in Paris. These are huge motor shows. They're usually really, really big. What was your hit from Paris 2018?
They are massive. Normally our pedometers are like smoking with all the walking that we're doing. My theme and hit here is electric. And the two cars that stood out for me were the all-new Mercedes-Benz EQC and the Audi e-tron. So these are both the respective brands' electric SUVs. And in terms of the EQC, we're talking about a full electric SUV, 300 kilowatts of power, 765 newton metres of torque, 0 to 100 in 5.1 seconds. It will be a brisk thing. The e-tron looks awesome, and it's got those electronic mirrors without actual mirrors. So, you know, they really have nailed this concept of the electric SUV. So I'm super excited. What about you? What was your hit?
Oh, look, my hit for the show, really, it was twofold, to be honest. I think the Peugeot E-Legend was amazing. And on that note as well,
So good.
Peugeot went down a real electric bent. So they had a little scooter downstairs in the motorcycle hall, which really grabbed my attention. It's called the EU Live concept. And along with the E-Legend, it shows a real move to this electronic future that everybody's talking about. I thought that was really interesting. In terms of something that we're going to be driving sooner rather than later, for me, the BMW 8 Series. It looks absolutely stunning.
Car.
Doesn't it look amazing? It looks tough, it looks fat, it's got beautiful styling. I think it's
you know what I'm looking forward to?
Yeah, tell me.
The M8.
Oh,
because when it comes to Australia, it can be just called the Mate.
The Mate. What are you driving? A BMW Mate. The thing for me too with the 8 Series, it was a legendary car in the 90s. So viewers will remember the 840, the 850, 8-cylinder and V12 engines back then. And I think it's a real return to form for BMW. You know, they've been taking some punches, so to speak, from competition, whether it be Audi or Mercedes-Benz, in the last 5 years or so. But I think this 8 Series is a real return to what they've done well. Grand Tourers, big two-door cars with really, really clever engineering that look amazing as well.
Yeah, look, the motor show was a real highlight there in terms of these new cool models. But in terms of misses, you know, misses are the ones that you look at and go, so for me, it was a surprise one. The Suzuki Jimny.
Ooh, that's going to be controversial, though, because a lot of people love the Jimny now and can't wait for the new one to arrive.
I mean, it literally melts our website every time we talk about it, and rightfully so. It looks really cool, and it's a boxy sort of G-Class Mercedes with a Suzuki badge on it. But there's a big problem. It has a terrible crash rating, and it's not hard to see why. When I saw it in person, I thought it was incredibly small. I know the current Jimny is small, so obviously this needs to be small as well, but you go to open the doors, and it's like they're made out of rice paper. They're so thin, you slam it shut. The interior is so incredibly cheap. So if they're looking to price this thing around the $25,000 mark in Australia, I reckon that's going to be pretty expensive for it.
And look, I know safety is not a sexy subject, and, you know, it can seem boring, and a lot of people say to us at CarAdvice, oh, yeah, you're wowzers. You know, we talked about the Mustang with its 2- and 3-star crash rating. Now we're talking about Jimny with 3-star. The reality is, for us at CarAdvice, we advocate for safer vehicles. We want the safest vehicles on the road. And I think the time has come for us to just say to manufacturers, look, these need to be 5-star cars. You know, a Jimny is going to be an affordable 4-wheel drive, even at 25 grand, that a lot of young people, perhaps first-time drivers, will be getting into.
Absolutely.
And we need it to be as safe as possible.
And
so
Trent,
I kind of agree with you.
You know what? The other problem as well is that you may be a really good driver. That's all fine, but we've seen horror crashes before where you'll have other drivers go through a red light. And what is the point in being in a car that looks good when it's inherently unsafe? You want to give yourself a fighting chance, especially if this is a first car. So, I mean, that is one thing to keep in mind. Now, your miss isn't quite a car, though, is it?
No, this is going to be a little controversial for some people, but the miss for me was, drum roll please, the Paris Motor Show. I thought the whole motor show was a real letdown, to be completely honest with you. Motor shows for us, for most of the viewers, when you were a kid, it was something you looked forward to.
Absolutely.
Once upon a time, we used to have them in Sydney and Melbourne in Australia, and as I said, Paris alternates with Frankfurt as effectively the biggest global motor show that there was. There were a lot of notable omissions, so not only did the show feel flat, and quite frankly for me, it felt like a motor show that was on its last legs. It felt like it was either the last or the second last version of the motor show we were going to see. It wasn't just that. It wasn't just the flat feeling. You went for a walk around in between the interviews that you had lined up, and there wasn't a lot to see. There wasn't a buzz about the place. It just seemed to be flat in general. It wasn't just that, though. It was the omissions. People like Volkswagen Group not there. Some of the French manufacturers, Mazda not there. Some of the French manufacturers not really going to big lengths to impress the public, impress the world's press with the vehicles that they were releasing. And I just think motor shows are struggling for relevance in 2018 more than they ever have. And the Paris Motor Show, just in general, felt really, really flat to me.
And look, the reason this is happening is because manufacturers are choosing to go to other events like Goodwood. That's a great opportunity for a sports car. CES is massive. SEMA. So this is where the trend is going away from motor shows, and we could see it even when we were filming video, which you can see a lot of our video content at CarAdvice.com. We weren't having to struggle to get cameras in there. There was just no one there. So really keen to see how this pans out and whether there will be a Frankfurt or a Paris Motor Show next year.
Absolutely, and the next big one for us that we'll be talking about on the show will be the Los Angeles Motor Show. That'll be the next one we're attending. But let us know what you think. Are you sad to see the end of motor shows, or do you like the fact that everything's leaked online and you know what these cars look before the covers ever come off at them at the motor show? We love it when people ask us for advice, especially if they're going to take it. Don't ask us for advice after you've already bought the car. That's no good.
That happens a lot.
It does happen a lot, yeah. I've just bought this. What do you think of it? Well, you shouldn't have bought it, for starters. We love it when people ask us for advice, and now on the radio show at caradvice.com, here on Your Money, we're finding that a lot of people are asking us about dual cab utes or four-wheel drive wagons, and we'll get into the nitty-gritty of that in a minute. But why are so many people buying dual cab utes?
I've got no idea.
Yeah, they don't need them,
in
do they?
Australia last year, #1 and #2 top-selling cars in Australia were dual cab utes, the Toyota Hilux and the Ford Ranger. So I don't know. People are just throwing their stuff in the back and showing everyone they drive a ute. So it is fascinating stuff, but is it the smart option?
No, definitely not. So what we're talking about here, when we say four-wheel drive wagon as an alternative to a ute, we're talking about things like Pajero Sport that you can see there, Prado, Nissan Pathfinder, those kinds of vehicles. Now, we've chosen Mitsubishi as the example here for someone who's asking whether they should buy a dual cab ute or a four-wheel drive wagon. And the reason we've done that is we think, especially in the dual cab ute segment, the Triton is an excellent value for money proposition. It's far and away the most affordable of the higher end dual cab utes, of the brands that we all know and trust. So it's really good value for money. And in a lot of these segments too, with Pajero Sport and Triton, it's based on the same platform. So essentially you're driving very much the same vehicle, aren't you?
Exactly. So these two cars are virtually identical underneath. The Pajero Sport sits on a Triton ladder frame chassis, and that means that you are getting a ute underneath, so you still get all the benefits of the four-wheel drive equipment, the ground clearance, but you get 7 seats instead of 5. You do get compromises in terms of towing though. So where the Triton will tow 3.5 tonnes with a brake trailer, the Pajero Sport will only tow 3,100 kilos. So that is obviously something to keep in mind, but I don't think we would ever recommend towing 3.5 tonnes in one of these, because that is a lot more weight than the actual vehicles themselves.
Itself. And, you know, we talk about four-wheel drive wagons a lot. You heard me use the example earlier in the show that if it's raining really heavily and you've got to walk down the street, imagine it's raining really heavily and you've got a dual cab ute. Even if it's got one of those silly tonneau covers, you've got to pop that off and move it out of the way to put your stuff in and then cover it back up. Have it all stolen 10 minutes later. With a wagon, you just open the back lid, load your stuff in the car, and away you go. So for most people, a wagon is actually a lot more practical for day-to-day use. And a lot of people are buying dual cab utes, let's be honest here, purely because of what they look like.
They are, but there's a slight compromise here, and that comes down to price. So with the Triton, for example, a top spec one will set you back around $48,000 plus on-road costs. Step up to the top spec Pajero Sport, on the other hand, and you're talking about $54,000 plus on-road costs.
Yeah, so there's a $6,000 price premium there.
And you go to Ford with the Ranger, they'll charge you about the $50-ish thousand mark for a XLT or a Wild Track.
Everest, what's the pain there?
Yeah, get the tissues out. We're talking about $70,000.
Going to be some tears shed buying an Everest.
Criminal amounts of money.
And the problem is the Everest doesn't feel like a premium vehicle. This is the bigger issue. And this sort of goes more, though, to the whole dual cab ute thing. You know, in our opinion at CarAdvice, probably the best riding, best daily driving all-rounder is the Maric. It rides really nicely. We talk about the safety issue with the second row. However, what we do say at CarAdvice as well a lot is that it's a compromise still. So it's better than the other utes, but the other utes aren't actually great. So in terms of driving dynamics and ride around town, you'd be better off in a Touareg than you would an Amarok. And I think with these vehicles here, you'd be more comfortable around town with two kids. So you got mum and dad up front, two kids in the second row, and say all their sports gear off to, you know, a soccer game on a Saturday morning. You'd be more comfortable in a Pajero Sport than you would in a Triton.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about the safety issue there with Amarok, we're talking about no airbags in the second row. So we don't recommend buying an Amarok if you are going to be transporting anyone that you like in the second row.
Exactly.
So where these wagons really come into their own is off-roading and camping, for example. You can do a lot of these things, and we've seen with the Pajero Sport there, you can see a video at CarAdvice.com demonstrating all of the four-wheel drive equipment. You can virtually go anywhere with them. The only compromise is that when they are based on utilities like the Pajero Sport and the Everest, they are quite narrow.
Yeah, they are narrow vehicles.
Of size restrictions in Thailand. So keep that in mind, but certainly test drive these things. They are very big, so if you are looking at a dual cab ute and you want to have a look at the four-wheel drive wagon equivalent, we always recommend a 24-hour test drive so you can take it home, make sure it fits in the garage, and make sure that it meets your towing requirements as well.
That's right. So if you've got any questions you want answered, send us an email at advice@caradvice.com, because we love getting them in, and then we can discuss it here and tell you where we think you should be spending your money. Paul, that's all we've got time for. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again next Wednesday night on Your Money at 8:30 p.m.